Asphalt flowers at night. The parking lot behind the closed factory is empty. Rain has just stopped. The asphalt is uneven, holding small pools that reflect a broken strip of neon from the motel. Wind moves a plastic bag along the fence until it catches and stays. The building no longer echoes. He stands facing the wall with his backpack on the ground. The concrete is cold through his jacket. He lights a cigarette and lets it burn before inhaling. The smoke drifts low and disappears. The wall is wide and clean, repainted too many times to keep count. He takes out the cans and lines them up without hurry. His hand stays off the wall. He looks at the space where the horizon will be, already knowing it. The cigarette goes out on its own. He drops it near the curb and steps closer. The motel room smells faintly of detergent and old carpet. One curtain is half open. The neon sign outside blinks and then steadies, washing the wall in a tired red that comes and goes. The bedspread is tucked too tight. He rinses his hands in the sink. The water takes a moment to warm, it never quite does. He sets the cans on the small table, checks the nozzles, wipes one with a paper towel, and throws it away. The trash can is already full. He leaves it that way. His jacket hangs on the back of the chair, heavy with damp. He sits for a while without turning on the television. From the highway comes a steady, distant sound. It never gets closer. When the neon flickers again, he stands and reaches for the door key, keeping his eyes away from the bed. The wall takes the first line without resistance. The paint hisses softly, steady, and controlled. He keeps his arm loose, the wrist doing most of it. The line runs long and even, stopping where it always stops. He steps back once, then closer again, adjusting nothing. He adds a second line above it, lighter this time. The shape suggests distance, though there is none. A light switches off somewhere across the road. He changes cans and shakes it once. The horizon settles into place. It looks familiar. He works without watching the image form, only the surface where the paint lands. When the can empties, he sets it down gently beside the others and reaches for the next one. The diner sits low beside the highway, its windows bright against the dark. Inside, the air is warm and smells of grease and coffee. He takes a booth near the window. The vinyl seat sticks slightly to his jacket. A truck idles outside, then pulls away. The waitress brings coffee without asking. The cup is chipped at the rim. He rests his hands around it, but does not drink. Sugar packets lie flat on the table, unopened. The radio behind the counter plays softly, a voice talking about the weather farther south. He watches the road through the glass. Headlights pass and are gone. When he finally takes a sip, the coffee has already cooled. He swallows it anyway and sets the cup back where it was, careful to keep it centered on the saucer. The night desk is lit by a single lamp with a yellow shade. It leaves the corners of the office dim and unfinished. The woman sits behind the counter with a ledger open in front of her, pen resting across the page. She looks up when he enters, not surprised. He sets the key on the counter. She slides a fresh one toward him, already reaching for the ledger. He shakes his head once. The clock on the wall ticks loud enough to notice. She marks something in the ledger and closes it. For a moment they stand there, facing each other with nothing more to add. Then she turns off the lamp behind the desk, leaving only the hallway light on. He takes the key and walks back toward the stairs, his footsteps soft on the worn carpet. He finishes the last section without stepping back. The paint dries faster than it used to. The surface dulls almost immediately, losing whatever shine it had. He caps the can and listens to the small click it makes when it locks. For a moment he stands there, close enough to see the uneven grain of the concrete. He does not look for the whole image. His eyes stay on a narrow stretch of wall where the color thins and the gray shows through. He gathers the cans and puts them back into the bag. One rattles softly against another. He adjusts the strap on his shoulder and turns away without checking what remains behind him. The wall stays where it is, holding the lines. He starts a new section farther down the wall. The space is clean, untouched, still carrying the faint smell of fresh paint from some earlier night. He draws the first line, then stops before finishing it. The line stops wrong. The can hisses once more and then goes quiet. He lowers his arm and stays there. A car passes on the highway, slower than most, its headlights sliding across the concrete and moving on. The unfinished line holds, thin and exposed. It promises nothing. He sets the can on the ground without closing it. Paint gathers at the tip and falls, leaving a small dark mark at the base of the wall. He watches it for a second, then shoulders his bag and walks away, leaving the rest of the surface empty behind him. Morning comes in thin light. The rain has washed the dust from the asphalt, leaving it darker, almost clean. Along the wall, the colors have softened. Some have begun to run, losing their edges. Near the curb, the paint has gathered into shallow stains that the water cannot carry away. A truck is parked nearby. Two men stand by the wall, talking quietly, rollers resting against their legs. One of them checks the surface with his hand. They wait for it to dry a little more. No one looks closely. He stands across the lot, near the road, hands in his pockets. From there, the unfinished line is barely visible. It blends into the concrete. The light lifts. After a while, he turns and walks toward the highway, leaving the wall to the day. Before it falls, the saw's vibration lingers in my palms after I set it down, a low echo that doesn't belong to the air anymore, but to my hands themselves. They're cleaner than they should be, considering the work. The chain was new this morning, freshly oiled, the casing wiped before I started. I remember noticing how little it left behind. The hum fades. My hands keep it a moment longer. There's a faint sweetness to them, resinous, almost pleasant. I flex my fingers once, then stop. The strap on my glove catches against my wrist where it's been fraying for weeks. I've known about that. I haven't fixed it. The tree stands where it always has, thicker than I remember, though everything grows that way when you aren't paying attention. Low on the trunk, the bark is split by an old scar, long sealed over, the grain folding around it. A faded mark sits there, half swallowed. It was meant to mean something. It doesn't, not anymore. I line up the fall the way I was taught downhill, away from the saplings, clear of the fence. The slope agrees just enough to make the plan feel sound. Usually that's all it takes. The notch comes out clean, too clean. The wedge drops free, pale, and exact. For a second, the saw runs so smoothly it feels unnecessary, as if the decision has already been made without me. I pause, not waiting, just confirming what I already know. The forest doesn't respond. Something close buzzes and stops. Sawdust slips down my collar and settles against the base of my neck. I leave it there. The back cut starts higher than I intended. I notice the difference immediately and keep going. Stopping now would only stretch the moment, give it weight it doesn't deserve. The first crack, I isn't a sound so much as a jolt that comes up through the soles of my boots into my knees. The fibers stretch and hold longer than they should. Hold. I tell myself this is normal. The weight shifts barely, just enough. The crown begins to move, 1 degree folding into another, the motion quiet but unmistakable, the wrong answer arriving before I've finished asking the question. I step back. Too late. The tree commits all at once. There's no pause now, no negotiation. The trunk clears the stump cleanly, and the branches come down hard, snapping, tearing, green breaking with a wet sound that's too close, too fast. The saplings disappear beneath it. I kill the saw. The quiet drops sharply, as if something has been cut short that wasn't meant to be. My hands shake now that they're empty. The air smells sharp fuel, sap, something bruised. Smoke hangs low, then thins. The saplings don't rise. They stay pinned, twisted into the soil. A few stand crooked, bent past correction. It isn't ruin. It's worse. It's careless. I step closer. The ground here is softer than it looks. Worked recently. I knew that. I knew it earlier. The knowledge doesn't argue with me now. Through the trees, I can see a square of pale glass a house window. Too far to make out faces. Close enough to feel the presence behind it. The owner's name presses in without an image, just the sense of lines that don't move. I tell myself the damage is minor. Young trees recover. That's true, often enough that I let the thought stand in place of anything else. I walk the length of the fall, stepping over broken stems, counting without intending to. I stop when I notice I'm doing it. The number stays with me anyway. Back at the stump, the hinge looks worse up close, ragged, uneven, a few careless degrees doing too much work. I touch the cut with my glove and leave a dark smear of sap where there hadn't been one. I pull my hand back quickly, as if the tree might notice. For a moment, I consider trimming the crown, lifting some of the weight, correcting something while there's still a shape left to correct. The thought doesn't last. I take the marking tape from my pocket. There's barely any left. I tie it to one crushed trunk, then another, loose and crooked, the knots careless. I don't straighten them. I don't add more. A truck passes somewhere beyond the stand. It doesn't slow. I clear loose fibers from the stump with the tip of the saw, working neatly, precisely, as if that part still matters. The cut looks finished now. Acceptable. I carry the saw to the edge of the trees and set it down. I wipe the chain with a rag already soaked through, oil dark and heavy, dripping onto the soil beneath my hands. I don't move to stop it. When I turn back, nothing has changed. Leaves are dulled where they've been crushed. One has blackened along the edge, curled tight. I reach into my pocket and fold the remaining tape into itself, again and again, until it's no longer usable, and leave it on the stump. I stay where I am, watching the oil spread into the dirt, watching it slow, watching it stop, knowing it will dry there long before anything else does. Before the shutters close, the morning was cold, although the calendar had been promising spring for weeks. Mark stood at the kiosk, called Joe's News and Tobacco, and waited for the metal shutters to give into his hands. They rose slowly, with a dull grinding sound, as if they were more tired than he was. Every morning the sound felt heavier, not louder, heavier. Concrete dust hung in the air. It settled on everything. Cigarette packs, the edges of newspapers, Mark's hands. His fingers were still faintly black, though he no longer tried to soil them. Printing ink stayed longer than memory. He did not think much about it. Around the kiosk, glass was rising. New buildings grew fast, wrapped in safety nets, as if they were still ashamed of themselves. The glass reflected the sky, but not the street. The street remained below with its old intersection, cracked asphalt, and smells no one bothered to disguise. Mark wiped the counter with an old rag. It was gray now, though it might once have been blue. The motion was slow and precise, without any real intention to improve things. Light fell at an angle, sliding across surfaces and stopping on the dust. It did not warm anything. It only revealed what was still there. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet for a place that had once lived from morning to night. Old magazines stood like forgotten witnesses, their covers faded, their names irrelevant, their dates powerless. Mark did not move them. They stood as they had yesterday, as they would tomorrow if no one threw them away. He was not sad. Sadness requires energy. This was calm. The kind that comes when a man understands that his presence is neither a victory nor a defeat, just a brief error in time. Standing at the kiosk, Mark knew the water was rising. It had not reached his knees yet, but it would. The bell above the door rang once, sharp and light. A young woman stepped inside, her coat clean, expensive, the kind that did not belong to weather. Earbuds were pressed into her ears. She was already speaking, her voice angled slightly away from the room, shaped for someone who was not there. Mark looked up, not fully just enough to register movement. She paced a half step in front of the counter, free hand drawing short lines in the air. Numbers passed through her sentences. Words about growth, timing, alignment. She did not look at him. Her eyes moved past his shoulder, toward the glass behind him, where the street was reflected in a cleaner version of itself. Mineral water, she said, without breaking her call. She named a brand. The syllables were precise. Mark shook his head once. "Don't have that," he said. His voice was calm. It did not compete with hers. He reached down and placed a plain plastic bottle on the counter. The label was thin, slightly wrinkled. It caught the light poorly. She glanced at it, then back into the distance. There was a pause, just long enough to signal disappointment, not long enough to matter. She nodded to herself, still talking about investments, about a new vision for the neighborhood. Coins landed on the counter, carefully, as if placed to avoid contact. One of them rolled, struck the side of the old cash register, and fell flat. The sound was brief and hollow. Mark picked it up. Their fingers did not meet. She was already turning away, the conversation pulling her forward. The bell rang again. Then the street noise folded back into place, as if nothing had happened. Mark set the bottle aside and returned the coins to the drawer. He did not count them twice. There was no reason to. The counter was empty again. The air settled. Outside, the glass buildings continued to rise. Inside, nothing had moved that mattered. Across the street, the bakery was no longer a bakery. The sign that had once promised rye bread and warm mornings was gone. In its place stood a new name, Lardist. The letters were clean, deliberate, slightly tilted, as if effort itself were part of the product. Mark read it twice. He recognized the language. He even knew what the word meant. Still, it did not say bread to him. It did not say morning. It said nothing he could use. The windows were larger now. Inside, shelves stood bare, except for carefully spaced items. People sat at small tables, holding cups that looked fragile. They leaned forward when they spoke, as if closeness could be rehearsed. No one lingered near the door. Mark watched from his stool. Down the block, 2 workers were taking down an old sign. The metal was faded, the paint cracked, the edges bent from years of wind. They worked quickly, without ceremony. When the sign came loose, a lighter rectangle of brick appeared beneath it, clean, unweathered, almost young. For a moment, the wall looked unfinished. Then it looked corrected. Mark felt the shift then, not as anger, not even as loss, more like recognition. The street was learning a new language, one he would never speak fluently. His city was becoming a backdrop, something arranged for people who had never waited here in the cold, never counted coins, never learned which cracks in the pavement filled first when it rained. He had not changed. That was the problem. A bus passed, briefly blocking his view. When it was gone, the workers were already carrying the old sign away. They did not look back. Mark lowered his eyes to the counter. The wood was scratched, the grain worn smooth where hands had rested for years. He ran his thumb along one of the marks, then stopped. The street continued without him. The evening papers arrived later than they used to. Mark heard the van before he saw its engine idling too long, a door sliding open and shut without care. The bundle landed on the pavement with a soft, tired sound. He carried it inside and cut the string. The papers loosened at once, as if they had been waiting for permission. On the front page, the headline spoke of record growth, of renewal, of a district finally becoming what it was meant to be. Mark read the first line. Then he folded the paper and did not read further. He took one copy and stepped outside. The folding chair stood where it always did, its metal frame cold through his coat. He sat and placed the newspaper on his knee. People passed him the way they passed a lamppost or a trash bin, without decision, without recognition. From beneath the counter, he took the bottle of cheap whiskey. He opened it slowly. The cap made a small sound. He drank without hurry. The wind picked up. It caught the edges of the papers stacked by the door. Mark watched them shift, lean, and then lose their order. He did not reach out. Pages lifted and turned on their own. One sheet tore free and slid along the street, moving with more purpose than he felt. It reached the curb and pressed itself against the wheel of a polished car parked nearby. A Tesla. The white paper darkened where it touched the rubber and stayed there, stuck like a smear. Mark looked at the remaining stack. It was uneven now. He did not straighten it. The streetlights flickered on. Somewhere above, glass reflected light it was not meant for. Mark took another drink and waited for the cold to return. The sun slipped behind the new buildings without ceremony. It did not linger on the street the way it used to. Shadows arrived early now, stretched thin and colorless along the pavement. Neon signs came alive one by one. Their light was sharp, impatient, too bright for Mark's eyes. It erased edges instead of softening them. He watched it reflect in the glass across the street, multiplying itself until the block looked fuller than it was. He stood and folded the chair. His joints protested briefly, then agreed to the movement. Inside the kiosk, he pulled the shutters down. The metal rattled, then settled. The sound was familiar. It belonged to him. He turned the key. The lock clicked small, precise, final. It was the last honest noise of the day. Mark leaned against the cool metal and took out a cigarette. He lit it, shielding the flame with his palm. Smoke rose slowly, pale against the electric night. For a moment, it held its shape. Then it thinned and disappeared. Cars passed. Voices drifted by, detached from faces. None of it asked anything from him. He finished the cigarette and crushed it under his shoe. Tomorrow, he would return. He would lift the shutters. He would wipe the counter. He would stand where he had always stood. And when someone finally asked him to leave, he would, without argument, without explanation. He would step aside as quietly as he had lived, leaving no mark that the street would need to remember. By the pit, the lot is fenced with orange mesh that sags between metal posts. What used to be a house is now a shallow pit filled with broken boards, bricks darkened by old rain, and a refrigerator lying on its side with the door torn off. Dust hangs close to the ground. A man stands just outside the fence, hands in his jacket pockets, waiting for no one to notice him. A machine idles nearby, its engine ticking unevenly as it cools. One of the workers drinks from a plastic bottle and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. The man watches the water run down the bottle and drip onto the dirt. His shoes are already muddy. The boards are stacked without order. Nails stick out where they were torn loose. He stays where he is. He does not step inside. He looks until the shapes stop meaning anything. He steps through the opening in the fence when no one looks his way. The ground inside is softer, turned over by machines. He bends and lifts a piece of siding, then another. Each time, he sets it aside without care. Dust settles on his sleeves. A bent nail catches the cuff of his jacket. He frees it slowly and straightens the fabric with his thumb. Nearby, a child's chair lies crushed under a beam. One leg is gone. He nudges it with his shoe, and it rolls once, then stops. He keeps moving things, not searching, making space. His breathing stays even. Under a slab of plaster, he finds the toy. At first, it looks like a piece of scrap metal dulled to the color of soil. One wheel missing, the paint eaten away. He turns it with 2 fingers. Rust flakes off and stays on his skin. The shape comes together. It is smaller than he thought, lighter. The metal feels thin. He rubs it once with his thumb. The rust does not come off. There is a faint bend in the axle. He does not try to straighten it. The engine starts again. Sound spreads across the lot. He keeps the toy in his hand. He tries to clean it with the edge of his sleeve. The fabric leaves a dark smear, but the rust stays. His fingers turn the same dull red-brown. He wipes them on his jeans. The mark remains. For a moment, he stands with the toy in his open palm. He could put it in his pocket. There is room. He closes his hand once, then opens it again. He sets the toy down on a piece of dry wood near the edge of the pit, not where he found it. It rests crooked. He steps back and leaves it there. The workers return to their places. The machine moves forward and the ground shakes lightly. A board snaps somewhere. Dust rises again. The sun breaks through for a moment, low and pale. It touches the wood at the edge of the pit and the small metal shape on it. The rust dulls the light. He turns away. By the time he reaches the fence, the noise has filled the space behind him. The toy is harder to see now. He does not look back. An unused ticket. The coffee had already gone cold by the time Daniel noticed it. He sat at the small table by the window of the motel room, the mug held between both hands. The steam was long gone. Outside, the highway moved without interest. Trucks passed in patient lines, their sound stretched thin by distance. Heat was already gathering on the asphalt, though the day had barely started. The parking lot was half empty. Near the ice machine, a plastic chair lay on its side, as if someone had started to sit down and then changed his mind. Daniel did not rush. Mornings no longer asked for much. He folded yesterday's receipt and slid it into his wallet, out of habit rather than need. The leather was cracked at the edges. When he opened the last compartment, one he hadn't touched in years, something pale slipped halfway out and stopped. A ticket, thin, stiff, yellowed at the corners. He placed it on the table beside the mug and finished the coffee, though it tasted like nothing now. The ticket stayed where it was. The printed date had passed so long ago, it no longer seemed exact. Daniel showered. The water came out hotter than he expected, then turned abruptly cold. He stood there a moment longer than necessary before drying off, dressed, and put on his jacket. Before leaving, he picked up the ticket and then set it back down again. Only after locking the door did he return for it, sliding it into his pocket, where it bent slightly, already used to being folded into places too small for it. The town stretched along the highway like an afterthought. A gas station, a diner with tinted windows, a tire shop that never seemed open. The light was flat and white, the kind that erased edges. Inside the diner, he took a seat at the counter. Coffee? The waitress asked, already pouring. He nodded. She didn't look at him when she set the cup down. Her movements were practiced. When she wiped the counter, she missed a small spot near his elbow and didn't come back to it. He ordered eggs. He ate half of them. When he paid, the ticket came out with the bills, caught between paper and leather. He set it on the counter while counting his change. The waitress noticed it only long enough to push it back toward him with one finger, careful not to crease it further. "Thanks," he said. She nodded once and moved on. Outside, the heat had settled. Daniel sat on a low concrete wall behind the diner and smoked. The smoke rose straight up and disappeared. For a while, he watched the shimmer above the road. Later, he spent the afternoon at a warehouse on the edge of town. The work was simple, moving crates of irrigation parts from one pallet to another. Cardboard, grease, dust. Nothing that asked for memory or kept it. Twice, while lifting a box, he felt the ticket press against his hip. He adjusted his stance once, then didn't again. At 4, he sat on an overturned crate and lit another cigarette. The air inside the warehouse barely moved. "You heading out tonight?" a younger man asked from the doorway. Daniel shook his head. "Figured," the man said, and went back inside. By evening, Daniel was back at the motel. The ticket moved from his pocket to the table, then back again, and later to the knitstand. It followed without resistance. He turned the television on and off again. The screen left a faint square of light on the wall that faded slowly. He took the ticket out once more and smoothed it flat with his palm. The airline name meant nothing to him. He recognized it only by the shape of the letters. Standing outside later, he tried to remember where the flight had gone. The city name was there, clear enough, but it did not open anything. He didn't look it up. The next morning, he drove east until the road widened and signs began to appear more often. An airport announced itself from faraway low buildings pressed flat against the land. He parked and walked toward the terminal. He did not go inside. His breath felt shallow for reasons he did not name. He stood near the fence where planes lifted off and landed without ceremony. A small jet passed overhead, loud and brief. Around him, people moved with bags and phones and faces turned forward. He took the ticket out of his wallet. The paper felt softer now. He folded it once more and set it down on a bench near the entrance. He did not wait. He did not look back. The drive back was quiet. The highway accepted him without comment. That night, the motel sign flickered. One letter went dark and came back again. Daniel sat on the concrete step with a cigarette and watched the light across the road at the gas station. Cars pulled in, filled up, left. The ticket did not come back. There was a faint rectangle in his wallet where it had been. He closed it and put it away. The world continued. A truck downshifted somewhere on the highway. He remained. That was all. A functional man. The air conditioner had been humming since morning. Not loudly, not insistently, just enough to remind the room that something was still working. It was the sound of a machine that had been running too long and no longer expected to be thanked. Without it, the office would have felt abandoned. The building stood beside the highway. A glass facade facing the road, forever smeared with dust and exhaust, forever cleaned at night until it shone again. Beyond the glass lay the gray Ohio sky and an endless procession of trucks. They moved in one direction only, steady and indifferent, as if the world had narrowed to a single lane. They promised nothing. They simply passed. Inside, the cleanliness was excessive. White surfaces, metal edges, glass everywhere. The carpet was so pale that even shadows appeared exposed upon it. Elias sat at his desk and watched the morning light fall across the floor. The shadow shifted slowly, almost politely. It was the only thing in the room that moved without instruction. Behind him, the coffee machine rattled and hissed. It always sounded like someone struggling to breathe through a narrow opening. Elias waited until it stopped. He disliked overlapping noises. Order mattered. If not here, then nowhere. 3 binders lay on his desk, black, glossy at the edges. He lifted one, nudged the second, straightened the third. All 3 had to align perfectly with the edge of the desk. When they didn't, the room felt unstable, as if something essential had tilted beyond repair. It made breathing harder. His suit was expensive. Years ago, that fact had meant something. Now it was only information. The elbows were worn, slightly, though only he noticed. Others saw the cut, the label, the surface. The smell was worse. Cheap cologne mixed with old car upholstery. A scent that clung no matter how often he washed. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. The hum of the air conditioner evened out, becoming almost gentle. At times like this, it felt as if the office breathed with him, a temporary body he could still inhabit. A truck with a blue tarp passed outside. An advertisement ran along its side, promising speed and reliability. Elias read it without awareness. Words no longer carried weight. They were marks on a surface, like the things he sold. He glanced toward the corner where the cabinet stood. locked. Inside were the Hilton bags with his name stitched on them, his belongings. Shirts, documents, a few books he no longer read. Everything that remained of a place once called home. A cabinet was quiet. It demanded nothing. The phone on his desk stayed silent. He checked it several times an hour, though he knew it would not ring. Mornings were always like this, as if the world was still deciding whether to include him. He stood and walked to the window. The glass was cold. He touched it with his fingertips, as though confirming the boundary between inside and out. The highway roared on. Movement without purpose, life without direction. The air conditioner shifted tone again. Elias returned to the desk and checked the binders once more. Everything was aligned. The world, at least in this room, still held together. He sat down, straightened his back, and waited for the day to begin, knowing it would not differ from the one before it. He locked himself into the office restroom and turned on the hot water. The pipes groaned briefly, then obeyed. Steam rose and clung to the mirror, softening the sharp lines of the room. For a moment, the space looked forgiving. Elias placed his hands on the porcelain sink. The surface was cool, too clean. He leaned closer and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the small mirror he had brought with him long ago. It had once hung in a hallway at home. He no longer remembered which home. The mirror was scratched at the edges, but the center remained clear. That was enough. He applied shaving cream slowly, methodically, as if each motion required concentration to remain real. His hands trembled. Not violently, just enough to be noticeable. He watched them without interest. The tremor had been there for months. It belonged to him now. He did not argue with it. The razor moved carefully across his skin. He shaved in short strokes, rinsing the blade after each pass. The sound of metal against stubble was quiet, intimate. It reminded him that his face still needed maintenance, like everything else he presented to the world. Neglect showed quickly. Steam fogged the mirror again. He wiped it with the edge of his hand and continued. His eyes looked tired, but not dramatic. No tragedy there, just erosion. When he finished, he splashed water onto his face and dried it with a paper towel. He threw the towel away immediately. Evidence mattered, especially in places meant to stay neutral. He unbuttoned his shirt and removed it carefully, as if it were fragile. The collar was the first thing he inspected. White, still white. That was the important part. As long as it stayed clean, he remained acceptable. A man with a place. A man with credibility. He replaced the shirt with another, freshly pressed, taken that morning from a Hilton bag. The fabric was stiff, almost resistant. He slid his arms into the sleeves and buttoned it slowly, starting from the middle. The ritual was precise. There was no room for improvisation. He adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. The knot sat properly against the collar, hiding the slight looseness at his throat. He straightened the jacket, smoothed the lapels, checked the alignment of everything that could be aligned. For a few seconds, he stood still. The man in the mirror looked functional, sellable, someone who could be trusted with keys and signatures and promises. Someone who belonged on the other side of the table. Elias nodded once, as if confirming an agreement. He turned off the water, unlocked the door, and stepped back into the office, his armor secured, his role intact. The drive took longer than it should have. It always did. The road curved through parts of the town that no longer pretended to be alive. Closed diners, empty parking lots with faded lines, signs advertising services that had vanished years ago. Elias kept the radio off. He preferred the engine's steady noise, the one thing in the car that did not ask for his attention. Inside, the air smelled of old tobacco and the artificial sweetness of a new car air freshener. The two scents did not blend. They argued quietly, filling the space between him and the windshield. Elias drove with both hands on the wheel, his posture upright, practiced. He had learned long ago how a professional was supposed to sit. At a red light, he picked up the key ring from the console. Heavy, over-designed, a polished object meant to imply permanence. He wiped it with the cuff of his jacket, though it was already clean. The keys caught the light and flashed briefly. For a moment, they looked important. The light changed. He put the keys down and continued. The villa stood at the edge of a development that had grown too fast and then stopped. The lawn was trimmed to precision. No leaves, no weeds. The house waited in silence, its windows dark, reflective. It looked finished. That was the problem. Elias parked carefully and stepped out of the car. The air was still. Even the distant highway sounded muted here, as if respect were required. He walked to the door and selected the correct key without looking. His hand knew the order. The lock clicked. The sound echoed inside the empty house, sharp and final. It reminded him of a gunshot heard from far away contained, but impossible to ignore. He paused before stepping in, then crossed the threshold and closed the door behind him. The interior was immaculate, too immaculate. The rooms were large and undecided, waiting to be told who they belonged to. Elias moved from one space to the next, his footsteps softened by new flooring. In the kitchen, the counters shone under the ceiling lights. No marks, no stains, no evidence of heat or knives or waiting. He opened a door, then another. Each lock responded with the same precise sound. Each room answered with silence. Bedrooms that had never known sleep. Bathrooms untouched by routine. A dining area arranged for a meal that had never been planned. As he walked, he felt the rooms pressing in not physically, but with expectation. They were ready. He was not. The house did not need him. It only tolerated his presence. He stopped in the living room and looked around once more. Everything was in its place, and nothing belonged. Elias held the keys loosely in his hand. They were warm now, warmed by him alone. He realized then that he would leave without taking anything, without changing anything, just as he always did. The house would remain as it was, waiting, empty, complete. He turned back toward the door, the sound of his steps following him through the silence. The man appeared while Elias was locking the door. He had not heard him approach. One moment the driveway was empty. The next there was a figure standing a few steps away, uncertain, as if he had arrived by mistake and was waiting to be corrected. An old local, thin jacket, worn shoes. His face carried the calm of someone who no longer expected much from places like this. "Excuse me," the man said. His voice was dry, without demand. "They told me there might be work here." Elias shook his head. The gesture came before the thought. "No work," he said. The words sounded unused, as if they had been stored too long. The man nodded. He did not apologize. He did not look embarrassed. He only glanced past Elias, toward the interior of the house, where the door stood half open. Sunlight slipped through the glass and fell onto the polished floor inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dust floated in the beam of light. Fine particles, barely visible, rising and falling without pattern. They moved slowly, almost carefully, as if the air itself were tired. Elias followed them with his eyes. The floor beneath them was flawless. Imported wood, sealed, polished, protected. Nothing touched it except light and dust. "Do you know the way back to town?" the old man asked. Elias pointed down the road. "Straight," he said, then left at the gas station. The man thanked him. His eyes returned once more to the dust, to the light, to the space that promised something it could not deliver. Elias felt the moment stretch, not heavy, not awkward, just present. They stood there together, two men with no reason to be where they were. One had come looking for work, the other for a buyer. Neither would find what he needed. The old man adjusted his jacket and turned away. His steps were slow but certain. He did not look back. Elias closed the door. The lock responded with its familiar sound. Inside, the dust continued to move in the light, unseen now, unnoticed. He held the keys for a second longer than necessary, then slipped them into his pocket. The house returned to silence. The mirror stood at the far end of the foyer, framed in dark wood, polished to a dull sheen. It was tall, expensive, and positioned to reassure. Elias stopped in front of it without intention, as if the house had placed him there. The reflection met him immediately. No distortion. No mercy. The suit fit well. The tie was straight. The posture was correct. He looked like someone meant to be trusted with decisions. Someone whose name could appear on a sign without causing concern. He held the gaze longer than usual. Up close, the surface told a different story. Fine scratches in the glass. Marks left by hands that had paused here before his. The mirror had seen many versions of the same man. It remembered them better than he did. Elias lifted his chin slightly. The movement revealed the faint looseness at his throat, the place the collar hid. He thought of the walls around him, smooth, painted, recently finished. He knew what lay beneath them. Wiring, gaps, materials chosen to last just long enough. He understood then that he was no different. A surface maintained at cost, a finish reapplied as needed. What mattered was not what held, but what showed. He turned away from the mirror and sat down on the bare mattress in the adjacent room. It lay directly on the floor, wrapped only in thin fabric. When he lowered himself onto it, the material rustled softly. The sound was dry, final. It reminded him of age, not his, but the age of things that had already decided to stop pretending. He stayed there, hands resting on his knees, listening. The house made no response, no creaks, no settling noises. It was too new for that, too confident in its own shape. Elias knew, without calculation, that it would never be sold. Not this year, not the next. The town had emptied itself quietly a decade ago, and no amount of glass or imported wood could reverse that. This house was not waiting for life. It was displaying its absence. He stood again, slower this time, and took one last look at the mirror from a distance. The man inside remained intact, useful, presentable. Elias turned off the lights and walked back toward the door, carrying with him the certainty that he was not selling homes anymore. He was selling what remained after they were already gone. Waiting had its own weight. Elias felt it settle into the room long before he checked the time. He sat on a high bar stool in the kitchen, his feet resting on the metal rung, his back straight out of habit. The leather seats still smelled faintly of the factory, new, untouched, like everything else. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second landed cleanly, with no echo, no hesitation. It filled the space between the counters and the cabinets, between the ceiling and the floor. Elias did not try to silence it. He needed the proof that time was still moving, even if nothing else was. The sun slipped lower outside the wide windows. The light changed from white to pale gold, then to something colder. Shadows stretched across the marble countertop, emphasizing its veins, its imported perfection. He imagined the quarry it had come from, the hands that had cut it. None of that mattered here. After the first hour, he checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. He placed it face down on the counter and did not touch it again. After the second hour, he stood, walked once through the house, and returned to the kitchen. The rooms absorbed his movement without response. They were good at that. When the third hour passed, Elias opened the cabinet beneath the sink. He reached past the cleaning supplies and took out the bottle. Whiskey. He had placed it there weeks ago, without thinking, as if preparing for something inevitable. He did not look at the label. He poured the liquid into a paper cup left behind by the staging company. The amber color caught the overhead light and held it briefly. Almost beautiful, in a simple way. As he lifted the cup, a drop spilled onto the marble. It spread slowly, obedient to gravity, forming an irregular shape. Elias froze. He could have wiped it away immediately. The cloth was within reach. He didn't. He watched instead as the liquid thinned, dulled, and began to fade. The surface beneath it lightened, leaving a faint, chalky mark where the whiskey had been. Imperfect, irreversible. Outside, the evening deepened. The highway lights blinked on in the distance, one by one, like signals meant for someone else. No car turned into the driveway. No headlights slowed. Elias took a sip. The whiskey burned lightly, then disappeared. It left nothing behind that could be measured. He stayed there until the light inside the house no longer matched the light outside, until the room belonged entirely to itself again. No one came. No one had ever planned to. He returned to the office after nightfall. The glass facade reflected only fragments, now headlights sliding past, broken lines of light that never stopped long enough to form a picture. Inside, the air was cooler. The conditioner was winding down, its hum uneven, tired. Elias closed the door and stood for a moment without turning on the lights. Darkness softened the room. It hid the excess cleanliness, the effort. He took off his shoes and placed them neatly beside the door, toes aligned, heels touching the wall. The habit came from somewhere old. It no longer had a reason, but it remained. He walked to his desk and sat down slowly. The chair accepted his weight with a familiar sound. He reached into his jacket and took out a cigarette. He did not hurry. There was no one left to observe him. The lighter clicked once, then again. The flame caught. He inhaled, shallow at first, then deeper. Smoke rose toward the ceiling in thin, uncertain lines, illuminated briefly as a truck passed outside. The light moved across the room and was gone. Elias watched the smoke until it lost shape. There was no promise attached to the next morning, no expectation that anything would change. The thought did not frighten him. It arrived quietly and stayed. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The conditioner exhaled one last time and fell silent. The office held the stillness without complaint. Outside, the highway continued. Inside, nothing asked to be maintained anymore. Elias breathed out slowly and let the dark finish the day. Closing time. The neon sign of the Blue Star Diner flickered, casting a lonely blue glow onto the rain-slicked asphalt of Route 66. Inside, the last customer had just paid his bill, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and wet wool. Marta wiped down the counter, her movements slow and practiced, the rhythm of familiar comfort at the end of a long day. Outside, the rain came down harder, drumming a steady, melancholic beat on the diner's flat roof. Ben was in the back, humming a tune that was slightly off-key, but full of a weary warmth. He emerged, drying his hands on his apron, and leaned against the pass-through window. "Looks like it's just us and the storm tonight, Mar." Marta nodded, her gaze fixed on the empty highway stretching into the darkness. "It's a quiet one, the kind of night that makes you think." "About what?" Ben asked, starting to stack the clean, heavy plates. The clatter was a small, sharp sound in the otherwise quiet diner. "About all the people who've sat on these stools," she said, running her cloth over the worn red vinyl. "Where they came from, where they were going, if they ever found what they were looking for." The highway was a river of stories, and their little diner was a tiny island where travelers paused for a moment, leaving behind whispers of their lives. Most faces blurred together over the years, but some you never forgot. Just as Ben was about to flip the open sign to closed, the bell above the door chimed, a surprisingly sharp sound that made them both jump. A man stood there, dripping water onto the checkered floor. He was tall, shrouded in a long dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows of his hat. He didn't look like a typical traveler. There was a stillness about him, a weight that seemed to suck the air from the room. "Are you still open?" he asked. His voice was deep, like gravel rolling in a slow river. Ben hesitated, glancing at Marta. Technically, they were closed. But you didn't turn someone away on a night like this. Not on Route 66. It was an unspoken rule. Marta gave a slight nod. "Come on in," Ben said, forcing a smile. "Coffee's still hot." "What can I get for you?" The stranger slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, the one that wobbled slightly. He placed his hands on the formica, his fingers long and pale. "Just black coffee. And maybe a slice of that apple pie, if it's fresh." "Made it this morning," Marta said, her voice soft as she moved to get him a slice. The pie was her specialty. Ben poured the coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the thick ceramic mug. The only sounds were the rain, the hum of the refrigerator, and the soft clink of silverware. The man took a slow sip of coffee. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. He just sat there, watching the rain trace patterns on the large plate glass window. There was a profound sadness in his posture, a loneliness that felt older than the road itself. "Headed east or west?" Ben asked, trying to make small talk. "It's what you did in a diner. You filled the silence." The stranger seemed to consider the question for a long time. "Neither," he finally said. "I'm just on the road." Marta placed the pie in front of him, a perfect slice with a golden, flaky crust. He looked at it, then up at her. His eyes, visible for the first time under the brim of his hat, were a startlingly pale gray, like a winter sky. They held a deep, ancient weariness. "Thank you," he murmured. "It looks just like how I remember." Marta and Ben exchanged a look. How he remembered. Had he been here before? They didn't recognize him. They prided themselves on remembering faces, especially the memorable ones. He ate the pie slowly, deliberately, as if committing each bite to memory. He didn't say another word. The silence returned, thicker this time, filled with unspoken questions. Marta went back to her cleaning, polishing the chrome on the napkin dispensers until they gleamed. Ben restocked the sugar shakers. They worked around the stranger, moving through their familiar closing time dance. This diner had been their whole life. They'd inherited it from Marta's parents, who had opened it back when the route was the main artery of America. They'd seen the highway change, seen the interstate bypass them, siphoning off the traffic and the lifeblood. But they stayed. The Blue Star was more than a business. It was a landmark, a promise, a light left on in the dark. Tonight, that light felt fragile. The stranger's presence had brought the melancholy of the rainy night right inside, amplifying the quiet hum of endings that always lingered in the air at closing time. When he finished his pie, he pushed the plate away gently. He drained his coffee mug and placed a few crumpled bills on the counter, far more than enough to cover the check. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. "For the pie, for everything." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, looking back at them, "this place hasn't changed a bit. Still the best pie on the Mother Road." He smiled, a fleeting, sad expression. "Tell your folks I said hello." And with that, he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the night. The bell chimed softly as the door closed behind him. Marta and Ben stood frozen. "My folks?" Marta whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Her parents had passed away more than 20 years ago. They had been the ones running the diner back in its heyday, back in the 60s and 70s. Ben walked to the door and peered out into the darkness. There was no car, no sign of anyone, just the empty, glistening road and the relentless rain. He came back to the counter and looked at the money the stranger had left. Underneath the bills was an old, faded photograph. He picked it up. It was a picture of the Blue Star Diner, taken decades ago. The sign was new and bright, the paint fresh. Parked out front was a sleek, classic car. Leaning against it were Marta's parents young and smiling, their arms around each other. And standing with them, a hand on her father's shoulder, was a young man in an army uniform, grinning broadly. He had the same pale gray eyes. Marta came over and looked at the photo over Ben's shoulder. A gasp escaped her lips. I remember this photo. Mom kept it in her jewelry box. That's my uncle. Her younger brother. He went to Vietnam. He never came back. They stared at the face in the photograph, the young soldier full of life and promise, and thought of the weary traveler who had just sat at their counter, the man who was just on the road. The rain against the windows sounded like weeping now. They didn't speak for a long time. There was nothing to say. Some stories on Route 66 don't have neat explanations. They're just moments, echoes from the past that ripple into the present, reminding you that the road holds memories and ghosts. Finally, Ben took a deep breath. He walked over to the sign in the window and slowly, reverently, flipped it from open to closed. He turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen and the blue neon from outside. Marta carefully picked up the photograph and the money. She left the money in the register and tucked the photo into her apron pocket, pressing her hand against it. She looked around the quiet, shadowed diner. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of history, of love, of loss, and of the spirits who still traveled this long, lonely road, searching for a slice of home. "Come on, Ben," she said softly. "Let's go home." He put his arm around her, and together they walked to the back door, leaving the Blue Star Diner to the rain and the ghosts of Route 66, its neon sign a solitary beacon, promising that even in the darkest night, there's always a light waiting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the road. Until next time, travel safe. Cracked asphalt. The gas station was called Midwest Oil, though there was nothing Midwestern left about it, only the habit of standing where it had always stood. It clung to the roadside in Ohio like something forgotten in a coat pocket. Dust lay thick along the shoulder, pressed down by passing trucks that never stopped. The air was heavy, swollen with artesian damp, and the promise of a storm that had been gathering all afternoon. Above the diner, the sky hung low and gray, dull as sheet zinc. Even the light seemed tired. Elias stood beneath the rusted canopy, hands loose at his sides. His jacket had once been brown. Now it was a color without a name, worn thin at the elbows, smelling faintly of old oil and rain that never quite washed it clean. He watched the wind pushing empty chips bag across the cracked asphalt. It scraped and rattled, then lodged itself against a broken curb. No one picked it up. The world looked worn out from having to continue. Marta approached without sound. Her boots left dark, wet marks where the pavement still held yesterday's moisture. She wore a cheap plastic raincoat, transparent in places, clouded in others, as if it had already lived too long. She stopped a few steps away. She did not look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the distance, where the road dissolved into a low, uncertain line of trees. They stood there together, without greeting. Two people paused in a time that had stalled 10 years ago and never bothered to start again. The station hummed softly behind them. Somewhere, metal ticked as it cooled. Neither of them belonged to this place. But for a moment, neither of them had anywhere else to be. Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a crushed pack of cigarettes. It had been folded and unfolded too many times. Inside lay a single Pall Mall, and slightly in the middle, its paper yellowed at the filter. He held it for a moment, weighing it, as if another might appear if he waited long enough. The lighter resisted him. The wheel scraped, throwing brief sparks that died the instant they were born. He tried again. Nothing. The sound was small but sharp in the quiet, like a fingernail against stone. Marta watched without turning her head. There was no impatience in her face, only the calm attention of someone used to delays that led nowhere. On the third strike, the flame caught. It flared too high, then settled. Elias cupped it with his hand, shielding it from the air that had begun to hold its breath. He lit the cigarette, drew in once deeply, as if checking whether it was still real. He did not ask. He simply held the cigarette out toward her. Marta took it between two fingers. Her hand was steady. She inhaled carefully, not greedily, and the smoke rose straight up, thin and pale. For a brief moment, the wind stopped altogether. The station, the road, the sky, all of it seemed to wait. She exhaled. The smoke drifted toward the canopy and disappeared. They did not speak. There was nothing to explain. The cigarette passed back to him, then to her again, measured and quiet, like an agreement neither of them remembered making. Each breath shortened what little time the flame allowed, and neither of them tried to slow it. This was the conversation, the scratch of paper, the faint crackle of burning tobacco, the shared pause before the rain. When she handed it back, her finger brushed his knuckle. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it stayed longer than it should have. Her skin was cold. His was rough, dry from years of work that no longer existed. Neither of them reacted. They only registered it, the way one notices a change in pressure before weather turns. In that small contact, something settled between them. Not understanding, there was no need for that, but recognition. They were both leaving places that had finished with them. Not dramatically, not in anger. Simply because those places had stopped answering back. What waited ahead was no matter. Just quieter, emptier, more anonymous. Marta looked at the cigarette as if it were already gone. Elias followed her gaze. The ember glowed weakly now, collapsing in on itself with each breath. Time shrank to that red point. There were no names exchanged. Names belonged to rooms, to kitchens, to people who might call them later. There was no reason to carry that weight here. The past pressed too heavily to disturb, and the future was too thin to bother imagining. They stood close enough to share warmth without meaning to. The sky darkened another shade. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, not loud, just tired. Elias took the last drag. It tasted bitter and flat. He knew it would be the last cigarette of the day, maybe longer. He crushed it out slowly under the toe of his boot, grinding until the glow vanished completely. The pause ended, not abruptly, but the way all pauses do, by wearing itself out. The first drop fell hard, leaving a dark, round mark on the pale concrete. Then another. They came slowly at first, spaced far apart, as if the rain were testing the ground before committing to it. Elias ground the cigarette into the asphalt until there was nothing left but a smear of damp ash. He did it carefully, without hurry. The gesture felt final in a way that had nothing to do with smoking. Marta lifted her head. She adjusted the hood of her raincoat, the plastic crinkling softly in the thick air. She could have said something then, thanks, or take care, but both of them understood that words would only cheapen what had just passed between them. Silence had been enough, more than enough. A bus coughed somewhere beyond the diner, metal protesting as it came back to life. Its sound cut through the stillness, practical and impatient. Marta turned away. She walked toward the corner without looking back, her steps quickening as the rain gathered confidence. Elias watched her go, the shape of her raincoat blurring slightly as the drops multiplied. Then the rain came all at once. It hit the canopy, the road, the sign above them, loud and cleansing. Dust ran in thin gray lines toward the ditch. Elias stayed where he was. The pause had ended. What remained was the evening, washed clean of even that small connection, leaving only the road, the weather, and the quiet weight of continuing. The rain settled into a steady fall, no longer violent, just persistent. It darkened the letters on the Midwest oil sign and flattened the dust along the shoulder of the road. The air cooled quickly, losing its heaviness, becoming thin and sharp enough to breathe without effort. Elias stood under the canopy and watched the bus pull away. Its lights smeared into long reflections on the wet asphalt, stretching, then breaking as it turned onto the highway. The engine noise faded, swallowed by distance and rain. He slid his hands into his pockets. The familiar ache in his joints was still there. It had not been cured or softened, but it felt cleaner now, rinsed of the day's residue like a wound after cold water. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing needed to be. Behind him, the station hummed on, indifferent and reliable. Ahead, the road lay open and empty, reflecting the low sky without opinion. Somewhere, another town waited, no different from the last. Elias remained for a moment longer, listening to the rain strike metal and concrete. Then he shifted his weight, preparing to move, not because he knew where to go, but because standing still had already given him all it could. Nothing had happened. Two strangers had shared smoke and silence before the rain. That was all the evening contained, and it was enough.